Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this installment of our guest lecture series. As a reminder, this demonstration is being broadcast, so if you are watching online, please post questions to the YouTube chat. For our students and staff here today, please wait for us to pass around the microphone so we can hear all of your questions. Our goal with these demos and lectures is to highlight culinary excellence of contemporary chefs and culinary entrepreneurs. In the past few months, we have hosted Chef Michael Cimaruski of the Michelin-starred Providence, Jesus Cervantes, the head chef of Damian here in downtown LA, and Chef Tony Ansalt of the Michelin-starred Knife Pleat in Orange County. Welcome, Christopher. My name's Michelle Ledoux, and I'm the Director of Hospitality and Restaurant Management. Christopher Tompkins, founder and owner of Broad Street Oyster Company, has always been driven to the waves. Born in New York, he developed a love for the ocean and its fare at an early age. After living in Boston, Sydney, and Brooklyn, Tompkins settled into Los Angeles and cultivated his long-sought passion project, Broad Street Oyster Company. In 2017, Broad Street Oyster Company, which began as a roaming catering pop-up, established its flagship location in Malibu, California in 2019 and was met with fervor for global fanfare for the brand's throwback surfy-rockabilly vibes and quality seafood specialties, including a world-famous lobster roll adorned with sea urchin and caviar. The concept has since expanded across Southern California coast with additional locations in downtown Los Angeles in the Grand Central Market and Santa Barbara. The Broad Street Oyster Company is expected to open locations in San Francisco, Ghirardelli Square, and later this year on the Huntington Beach Pier. Welcome, Christopher. We're so honored to have you here with us.
Well, thank you. And that is a much more romanticized intro than I was expecting. So thank you for that.
We wanted to get all the good stuff, right?
Well, I'm very happy to be here. And my name is Christopher Tompkins, and I am the founder and owner of Broad Street Oyster Company, which, as you just described, is a seafood concept that has been experiencing some success over the last few years. But I am very excited to tell you about all of the work that went into it to make it. I still don't even consider it a success. Other people do, but to make it to what it is today. So thank you again for having me.
Pleasure. We're happy to have you. So can you kind of go back in time and sort of give us an understanding of your vision for this concept and how it was started from the beginning and to what we have today, which is a multi-location profitable business?
Yeah, well, I do think that it's so much easier to kind of frame the narrative and the story years after the fact, right? So when I started this company in 2017, it was not in the vision of what it is right now. And it wasn't in the vision that I have for it today for the future. And, just to kind of give you a very quick history, I grew up in upstate New York. I did not attend college. I worked odd jobs in pizzerias and construction sites from basically the age of 16 until 27. And it wasn't until I was 27 when I had thought, hey, I've always been passionate about food. I had this idea years prior of maybe trying to start a food truck, but I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't have any money, and I was scared. And that was when I was around 21 or 22. Fast forward to when I was 27, I still didn't have any money. I still didn't know what I was doing, and I was still scared. So then I thought to myself, well, now's the time. I had just backpacked around the world for about 2 years. I was traveling everywhere from Europe to Southeast Asia to Australia to South America, literally picking up any type of work that anyone would give me. And decided to come back to the States, packed up my belongings. There was not a lot of it. A bin and a backpack and a dog, drove across the country, took my time for 6 weeks, and arrived in Los Angeles in December of 2016. And that was when the idea of Broad Street Oyster Company was born. It wasn't until July or August of 2017 that I was a legal entity or that I had a business card or that I had a website. But the idea had been formulating, and I finally just took the plunge in spring or early summer of 2017. And the entire time it was just kind of piecemealing together what I thought a roaming seafood concept would be. And I didn't really know what it was. I knew that I needed coolers. I knew that I needed a couple of folding tables. I knew I needed a little Coleman camping grill and a pop-up tent. But I knew that I had $2,000, and I tried to make it work. And that's what I did. I spent $2,000 on that equipment. I sold my old pickup truck for an old van, loaded all the stuff into the van, and then thought to myself, well, now what? So I decided to call a couple of restaurants and farmers that I knew in Massachusetts and Maine that I had met throughout my travels, and gave them the idea of what I was trying to do. I'm like, hey, I'm in Los Angeles. I want to roam around and shuck oysters and make lobster rolls. What can you do for me? And they laughed and they go, well, we'll ship you a bag of oysters. Okay, great. Have that. Call up a producer in Maine. All right, we'll ship you a couple of pounds of lobster. And that's really how it started. I would cold call businesses. I would pick up the product from the airport after, convincing one of those businesses that they should let this crazy person set up outside of their real business, and would sell to people on the street. And I don't know if I'm going already too far off topic already, but just to kind of piece together that roadmap, that's how it started. And I had no idea where I was headed, but I knew that that's what I had to do every single day if I wanted to try and achieve the goal of paying my rent. So I'm on the road 7 days a week. If I didn't have an event booked up, I was calling a business to try and convince them to let me show up. I convinced bar owners to just let me pop up that same day with product. Like, hey, I have 2 bushels of oysters. I have enough lobster to maybe make a dozen or 2 lobster rolls. Do you care if I pop up outside your bar from tonight from 5 to 7 p.m. or from 8 to 10 p.m.? And sometimes they'd say yes. Sometimes they'd say no. If they said no, I'd figure somewhere else up, to set up. And I did that. And then I was able to piece together enough money to hire one of my friends so that it wasn't just me. And then we were able to save enough money to buy a second setup so that I could drop my friend off when he could start selling lobster rolls and oysters. Then I would drive to the other place and set up and do the same thing. Saved up enough money to buy a second van, then to hire another friend, and then to hire a friend of a friend. And then within 18 months, we had events booked 7 days a week, and we would have more than 1 to 2 events every single day. And we were doing that until one day I'm at an event making a lobster roll, and a gentleman in a suit walks up and says, hey, do you want a restaurant in Malibu? And I said, no, I don't. And, I went home that night, didn't even think about it. That was a Sunday night after Smorgasburg, which was like a big deal for me. I was invited to participate in Smorgasburg, and I had applied to be a vendor when I had first started, no response. I had applied the next season, no response. Before that first opening weekend for me, I finally get an email from Smorgasburg, and they, hey, we really love what you've been doing. We would love for you to be a vendor. And I thought that I won the lottery. I'm like, wow, this is it. This is the break I needed. I'm in Smorgasburg now. It's all smooth sailing from here. Like, thought it was over. And did that for about 5 months. And that's when that gentleman in the suit approached. Smorgasburg is every Sunday in downtown Los Angeles. Went home, as I said, didn't think a thing about it. The next morning, I get a phone call from a mutual friend of one of my employees. And he was a consultant who had initially put together all of these newer vendors in Grand Central Market about a decade ago. And he calls me and he says, hey, there was a guy who showed up to one of your events yesterday. He asked if you wanted a restaurant in Malibu. I think you should call him. He goes, I know who he is. He had worked in Grand Central Market. He had basically brought Egg Slut and a couple of other vendors out of obscurity and gave them an opportunity in Grand Central. He was now working for this multi-billion-dollar company out of Connecticut and New York and Georgia. And they really want you to take over a restaurant in Malibu. He goes, just at least give him a call. So I call him that same afternoon, And he says, yes, I have a burger restaurant that we'd love to kick out. And we would really like it if you were able to bring your concept into the space and do a summer-long residency. He goes, just do me a favor, drive out there, tell me what you think. I had been to Malibu 3 times in the previous 3 years, and all 3 of those times were to work an event. And I didn't think that that was the right time or the right place for the first restaurant of my business. But I decided to take a drive out there. So I got in one of my vans. I drove to Malibu, walked into the burger shop, ordered a burger, sat down, ate it, called that same guy. I still don't want it. He goes, why is that? I go, I don't think it's the right thing. I don't think it's the right time. I don't want to drive to Malibu every day. And he says, what do you have to lose? And I said, well, it's taken me 2 years now. And I just saved my first ever $20,000. So I have that to lose. He goes, how long did it take you? I said, 2 years. He goes, you'll make it back in less. He goes, you give me $5,000 as a security deposit. We'll take a percentage of your sales. And you open up your restaurant in this space and you run it all summer. And at the end of the day, if you lose your 20 grand, you know how long it will take you to make it back. So try it. And I still did not want to do it, but I put together a pitch deck. I signed on to a Zoom about a week or 2 later and had a few slides that I'd pieced together. I'd never done that before. I log into the Zoom and there's 10 executives on the screen. And I thought to myself, this is way more serious than I thought this was. And I log in, introduce myself, and throw together this slide after slide after slide. And it was basically me making a joke out of how Malibu wasn't cool and how we should have this new seafood concept. And it worked. They loved it. Within a couple of days, they send over a temporary licensing agreement, which was a month-to-month pop-up. Base rent was, I think, $5,000 a month for 2,700 square feet inside Malibu Village, which is one of the premier shopping centers in Malibu. And gave them that security deposit, signed away 10% of my sales for the summer, which I thought would be basically nothing. So I'm like, well, joke's on them because they're not going to make any money off of it. And we continued to do all of our pop-ups. And one of the stipulations of this deal was, hey, we'll give you this deal. You can move in here and you can open up and run it all summer long for these agreed upon terms, but you have to have this open in 2 weeks. I'm like, okay, no problem. And signed away. They gave me the keys. And now I'm looking around inside this space and I go, I don't know what I'm doing. And we were still doing anywhere between, at this time, 8 to 10 events a week, sometimes a little bit more. And I hold a meeting for the first time with my employees, who are really just a few of my friends and their friends. And we're sitting around having a beer. And we're like, so we're opening up a restaurant in 2 weeks. What do we do? And no one raised their hand and we didn't know, but we're like, well, we're going to open up this restaurant. And then I start calling a couple of operators that I had met during my pop-up, my pop-up days, and said, hey, I have this space and I have to be open in 2 weeks. What do I do? And someone would give me a piece of information. This wine bar owner that I knew said, well, do you have a business license? I go, no, I don't have that. I should go get that. Do you have a seller's permit? I go, I don't have one of those either. That sounds good. I need that. And finally, they go, what about an alcohol license, a beer and wine? And I go, no, I probably need that too. So this was actually around I think I was turning 30. I was turning 31. So I'd been doing this for almost 3 years. And I spent my 31st birthday bouncing around from government office to government office to government office, literally from 9 a.m. until 5 p.m., trying to gather all of the information that I needed, going to the county health department and pleading with all of them, saying, hey, I am opening a restaurant in 2 weeks and I have none of this stuff. And you need to help me. And that's pretty much what I did. And by the end of that day, I had almost everything. And I hope that everything that I'm about to say next doesn't influence you too terribly. But one of the things that you'll learn when you take this path of becoming an entrepreneur is you do not know what you don't know. And sometimes you just have to do something until they tell you that you can't do it. And that's basically what I did. We opened up the doors 2 weeks later with some of the proper licenses and without others. And I had loaded up a U-Haul the morning of the opening day and drove around from thrift stores and BevMos and found nautical themed goods and found kegs of beer, which may or may not have been legally for sale to the consumer. And we opened up the doors, and we had not slept because we had been doing events the entire week. That night we got to the restaurant at I think 10:30 p.m. and we finished setting up by 5 or 6 a.m. And then we just sat there and then realized that I had to go pick up a couple of my friends. Otherwise, we would have had no staff. So then I drove back to East LA, picked up my friends, drove back out, and then opened up the restaurant. And there was a line of people. Wow. And I did not expect a single person to be there on opening day. I truly did not. But I guess after being on the road for 2.5 years and building up somewhat of a social media following, they were there. And they knew who I was, and they wanted to be there on day one. And we did not know what we were doing, but we took their money and then made the food. and we did it, and we had a great day. And then at the end of that first day, we look around, we have to do this again tomorrow, and the day after that, and the day after that, and the day after that. I'm like, well, what are we going to do? And we just started building a prep list and putting together an order guide and, all of the things that you're going to be learning about now that we kind of had to learn about on the fly. And we opened up on the second day, and we opened up on the third day, and we kept doing all of those pop-ups in conjunction with our restaurant being open 7 days a week.
Wow.
And before I knew it, 6 months had gone by. And that same landlord and that big company had convinced me to sign a more permanent lease with favorable terms compared to what I was doing. And we signed it. And that was February 15th of 2020. 30 days later, to the day, March 15th, we have a packed restaurant. We had put up the 2 most successful months of our entire time in Malibu. And little did I know, there was a table in the back corner with multiple writers and editors of Bon Appetit. And they have a seafood tower, and they have a bottle of wine. And we're like, wow, this is it. Like, we're going to be famous. That's, I don't know, like, that's what we thought. And then everyone starts looking down at their phone, and I see guests getting up and leaving, which I didn't really care too much about because they had already paid. And we look down at our phone, and the governor has announced the shutdown. And it was 30 days after we had signed the lease.
Wow.
And we look around at each other, and we start opening up a few bottles of wine, and we shuck oysters, and we're eating oysters, and we're drinking some wine, and we're like, well, what are we going to do? And at that moment, I had no idea. So I went home and talked to my girlfriend, who is luckily still with me now. And she says, I don't know, but you have tonight to feel sorry for yourself, and then tomorrow you better figure it out. Get up the next morning, drive out to the restaurant. It was the quickest commute from Silver Lake to Malibu I'd ever had, which was a highlight for me. And we get to the restaurant, and we start cleaning, and we start stacking tables on top of each other and trying to just figure out what to do. It's like, well, we got to do something. So we're just organizing, cleaning the restaurant, doing an inventory. We set up a little table in the front door, and we're just thinking, and we're like, all right, well, we had joked about this because our restaurant is actually in what is considered the worst location in Malibu Village. It's all the way at the back of the mall. It shares windows with a fire lane that the garbage truck goes up and down 2 times a day. And we had joked when we had first opened, we should have a drive-through. And it was just a joke in passing. Fast forward to March of 2020, we opened up those windows, and we're like, oh no, we should have a drive-through. So we shifted around a little tiki bar. I put a counter next to one of the windows. We staged a video shoot where I think it was myself or one of my buddies in our car, and we're just filming ourselves driving down the fire lane and receiving, at the time, it was just an empty bag from the window. And then we put up Malibu's newest drive-through, now open. I call up a 24-hour banner printer. I throw together this image as I'm on the phone with him. And it's our logo, and it just says Malibu's newest drive-through, now open. And I said, how big can you print it? He goes, 20 feet by 30 feet. I go, perfect. He prints it. I pick it up that night. I climb onto the roof of the building the next morning through an access ladder, and we hang this 20 by 30 foot banner facing the PCH on the side of this building owned by this multi-billion-dollar company. And we stapled it to the side of it. And we went back downstairs, opened up the window, and we waited. And then eventually one car showed up. Another car showed up. Nothing crazy, but we still hadn't done our worst day. This was Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, the first week of the shutdown. We were still doing $500, $700. Our worst day had happened a couple of months prior. It was the first Wednesday of December of 2019, and we only did $300. So I was thinking to myself, like, well, this isn't that bad. Like, we're fine. If that was our worst day and we're doing above that, we're going to make it. We did that Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Saturday comes along, and we get destroyed. And it was the worst service at that point for us because we were just overwhelmed. We didn't realize that many people would show up. We weren't ready for it. And we got crushed from open to close. And it was probably to this day the hardest service that we've been through. But the entire time we couldn't stop laughing because we're like, wow, we're going to make it. Like, everyone else is closed. Our neighbors, these retail shops, were boarded up with plywood, closed signs on them. And here we are in the back of a strip mall with the fire lane, and we have customers all day long. And I went home that night and thought, I need to hire more people. And that's what we did. So we started to hire when everyone else was laying people off. And we started to grow the business. And we ran that drive-through until, I kid you not, there were a line of over 150 cars that branched into 2 lanes and wrapped onto the PCH.
Wow.
It became such a problem for the city that a year later they show up and shut me down with that. I go, that's fine, because they had just allowed outdoor dining. I go, I guess we'll just bring people outside. So we just adapted. We shut the drive-through. We bought a bunch of picnic tables. And if we didn't have enough seats for the guests, they would tailgate. They would literally open up the back of their truck, sit on the back, eat their food. And we just kept going. And we kept learning. We kept hiring. That summer of 2020, we were doing so well that this abandoned coffee and ice cream shop next door that shut down in the early days of the pandemic, that same executive who had given me the restaurant space asked if I wanted to take over a coffee and ice cream shop. I'm like, yeah, that sounds great. There's another walk-in. There's more storage. I like coffee. I like ice cream. There we go. And slapped a sign on that, opened up our coffee company. That was 2020. Just to get into some of like the nitty-gritty financial details, we had put together a very rough projection, and I had no idea what I was going to do when I put together this rough projection. So I Googled restaurant forecast, restaurant projection, figured out what I needed to have on that sheet, and just guessed. An average $1,000 per square foot on an annual basis is a decent marker for a restaurant space. And now it's always going to be different depending on the concept. But for a fast casual restaurant where you order at the counter, $1,000 a square foot sounded good to me. We had 2,700 square feet, 1,000 times 2,700, it's 2.7 million. So I thought if we did $2.7 million in 2020, we'd be okay. I'm like, I'll make a little bit of money. Everyone gets paid. We'll be open. We'll be open for a full year. Great. In 2020, we ended up doing $4.85 million, which we then led into 2021 with all of this momentum and this new staff that we were still training, and this fanfare that we were not expecting. And we got very lucky. Celebrities were showing up and they were posting about us because of the drive-through, or because of the outdoor, or just this, that, or the other. And it took off. And in 2021, we ended up doing $7.2 million out of that space. 2022, we opened up our Santa Barbara location in the beginning of the year. In the middle of 2022, we open up our Grand Central Market location, and we end up doing $12.5 million last year. We secure 2 additional locations, one that's opening up in just a couple of months on the Huntington Beach Pier in the old Rubies. And it's going to be a pretty iconic location for a seafood concept.
Yeah.
And that same executive who I had met going on 4 years ago had offered us a space in San Francisco inside Ghirardelli Square. And they're building us a custom restaurant to our spec on their dime because they want us there. And that's opening up around Labor Day, but Q4 of this year. So from those beginnings in late 2016 to mid 2017 until now, we're a $15 million a year business. And when these other 2 locations open up, the conservative estimate is that by this time next year, we're on track to do over $25 million a year. And that has all started with $2,000. And I kid you not, no knowledge. You, every one of you in this room, know more than I did when I started. Probably a lot more than I probably know now. And that's why I was just so excited to try and, speak to a class, speak to students, especially ones that are interested in culinary entrepreneurship, because I am here to tell you that it doesn't take much from a materialistic standpoint. If you have a concept and you want to work for yourself, I am telling you, you can do it with a very, very, very low budget. But what you do need is just the will to do it, the will to start it, the will to continue it, and the resilience to make sure that when something terrible happens, which things will happen, you have to go home, get over it, wake up the next morning, and continue running your business, because the business doesn't stop. And if you're a business owner, you don't stop. From when you wake up until when you go to sleep, you're thinking about the business, because that is your life. Broad Street Oyster Company is my life. If you look at our menus, there's cartoon versions of me. There's plush toys of me. Like, it's my life. And it's by far the greatest thing that's ever happened to me. And it's the greatest thing I've ever done. And it's transformed my life. Everyone I had grown up around, we always thought that we had a bleak future because no one that I knew ever really tried to do anything. They just allowed things to happen to them. And with that type of mentality, you really don't want to do much because you feel like, oh, well, what's the point? But when you try and take control of your own destiny, and I think that being an entrepreneur is literally that. You're risking your own capital in hopes of receiving more, right? With a business venture. That's what it is. So I don't know where I was really headed with that, but I'm just trying to say, you can do it. And I'm here to tell you that I did it. And it's the greatest thing that's ever happened to me, like I said. And I feel like I'm just a baby in this business. The chefs that you announced during the introduction, I've eaten at their restaurants, and I look to them like, wow, they know what they're doing. Like, that's phenomenal. I love the concept. But for me, this is what works for me. This is what works for my business. And we serve you a seafood tower in a lasagna tray. And that works for me because I like it. And because you can take it through a window and you can go eat it wherever you want. So, I'm very interested to just hear any of the additional questions that you may have for me. I'm really excited to have a Q&A with all of you. But that's me trying to wrap up the last 5 or 6 years of my life and to try and give you a glimpse of what the next couple of months will look like for me. And I hope that in 5 years I come back and I tell you, hey, yeah, that goal of $100 million a year business, we broke that. We're past that. Because I had that same dream when I was driving around in that van on day one, thinking I was an insane person. And I looked at these little mile markers as benchmarks and goals and all, whatever you want to name it, right? It's like that first $100 that I made felt incredible. And that first $1,000 that I made, I thought I was the luckiest man on earth. And that first $1 million that I made, I thought it was a dream. So I'm here to tell you, I'm living proof of it. Culinary entrepreneurship can absolutely change your life. And you don't even necessarily have to be the entrepreneur, but if you're surrounded by that entrepreneur and you decide, hey, I'm better in ops, or I'm better in the kitchen, or I'm this or that, doesn't matter. But you can make a living, and you can decide your own fate. So
That's fantastic, huh? What a story. This is, yeah, what everybody dreams of, Really amazing.
thank you.
So now, from when you started to now, how much of the business side do you actually work on? Do you do costing of your menu items and food costs and labor and all of that?
I do all of that.
You do all of that.
I have
Yeah.
an executive team that we've been slowly building up that I will delegate some of those duties to, but I am very intense and hands-on with the data that's in front of us, because you're reading the code of your business, right? Like you live and die by the numbers. No matter what anyone will tell you, they can say, oh, but the food's great, tastes amazing. That doesn't matter if your food cost is out of whack,
right?
Or if your labor is going to bleed you dry in a couple of months. So you have to pay attention to every line item on that P&L.
Yeah. When did you start incorporating P&Ls? And how long into your first operation?
I had outsourced a bookkeeper very early on in the pop-up days, because I knew by the end of that year I had needed to pay my taxes. If I was lucky, I was like, if I make enough money, I would need to pay taxes. And I think it was only, a few $1,000s at the end of 2017. But I knew I needed to have a rough idea of what I was doing. And it's been an evolution from those early, very crude, rudimentary books that we were keeping to what it is now.
Right.
Now we have a white glove service that takes care of our AP, it takes care of our payroll, it takes care of our P&L, the accounting, but I still have to look at it. And I look at the sales every single day. I look at the schedule every single week. We have calculators that are built into the scheduling to make sure that our labor targets are where they need to be.
Right.
And the one tip that I will tell all of you is that you want it to be as low as possible for labor, for cost of goods, because those are some of the controllable expenses that you have a say in. So if you don't have a great managing of that, you'll never make the money to continue.
Yep, very true, right? And we talk about that all the time. When it comes to product, how do you source that out? How do you choose what goes on the menu?
So we are a New England-inspired, California-based seafood concept. And the idea of the concept was, okay, we want to work with New England product when I can, which is why when I first started, I was working exclusively with oysters in Massachusetts and lobster from Maine. Those were the two pillars that I began the business with. Spending time in California, I quickly realized how abundant this phenomenal seafood is along the coast, and began talking to divers in Santa Barbara. And one of the first things that I picked up was a sea urchin. And I would go and meet the divers on the dock, climb onto their boat, if they were there or not there, pull up this bucket that they'd keep urchin in for me, pull it out of the water, load it into my cooler, cart it into the van, and drive to the event. So that's where I started when it comes to like selecting the vendors, right? It was an oyster farmer that I knew in Massachusetts, this company called Island Creek. I knew them because I had ate their oysters at their restaurants. The lobster was from Maine. Growing up in New York and living in Boston, that all of the great lobsters coming out of the ports in Maine. So called around, had them ship some lobster. And then grabbing that urchin from Santa Barbara. That works the way that I would just described when it's a smaller scale. When you're opening up a restaurant and you need to work on their delivery schedule and you need to work on PARs that are changing as your business is growing, it's much more difficult. And you have to be able to work with vendors that have the scale and the logistics to be able to bring it to you when you need it. And you also want to pay respect to the individuals and proprietors of these smaller businesses that you had worked with early on. So to this day, I still work with that farm in Massachusetts. I still work with that individual diver in Maine. I still buy lobster from one of the processors that I started with 6 years ago. Now, in addition to that network, we try and leverage our purchasing power with larger companies. Some of them are local, some of them are national brands. It just depends on what that item is and what cost they can provide it to us for.
Fantastic. And your iconic lobster roll, how did that begin? And did it always have the uni and the caviar on it, or how did that?
So the
process
lobster roll
happen?
was something that I had wanted to, in my mind, perfect when I was 21 years old, 22 years old, living in Boston. I would literally pick up lobster, make my own lobster roll, try and find the right bun, play around with either poaching, whatever, making a chilled mix versus just warm with butter. And I had done that 100 times. Didn't think anything of it. Did it just because I enjoyed eating it while I was living out there. Would travel around multiple times a week and try out top 10 lobster roll in Boston, top 10 lobster roll in New Hampshire, whatever it was. After work, drive there, buy a lobster roll. When I started the business, I knew that that's something that I wanted to be a focal point of Broad Street Oyster Company. So I played around with different buns. I called up different bakeries in Los Angeles, eventually convinced someone to make me, 6 or 12 at a time, and then started stuffing it with lobster and playing around with the composition of how that lobster roll would look. Thought, hey, it'd be pretty funny if I added caviar in this. Who would buy it? And then people did. And then when I was working in Santa Barbara one day, that same sea urchin diver goes, "You should put some uni on there." Like, okay, great, try that. And when we had opened up in Smorgasburg, I was up the night before just thinking, I'm like, what are we going to do there? Like, I know they're there for the lobster roll, they're there for urchin, whatever, but I need like an item. And for a lack of a better term, it's like I need somewhat of like a gimmick that would also taste good because it's a food event. And I thought $50 lobster roll. That's what I had. That was the idea that I had in my mind. And woke up the next morning, opened up Smorgasburg, plated the lobster roll with uni and caviar, and thought that looks pretty good, but what else can I do? And I called the same baker. I'm like, can you make a squid ink bun? They make a squid ink bun. Start taking pictures, and that's our $50 lobster roll.
Wow.
And that was our Smorgasburg exclusive item for a while. Instagram, that played a huge part of it. So they saw that lobster roll, and then people liked it, and they'd rush over right when we opened, and we'd only serve 10 a day or whatever it was. And that's kind of what steered us in that direction. And now we sell tens of thousands of lobster rolls, of lobster roll with uni, lobster roll with caviar, or both. And it's pretty wild that it just started from the idea of what's the difference between myself or someone else at Smorgasburg? They may be here for a lobster roll, but how can I make it an extra special experience?
Well, and we talk about that in our culinary management program, having a unique selling proposition, right? And so that is precisely what that is. And then having an exclusive item that you had at Smorgasburg. Really, that was brilliant, right?
As I said, you all know more than I did. I didn't know what that was.
That's what you did,
so
though. That's what you did. And so, intuitively, you knew that you needed to present something in a unique fashion that was also marketable, right? And so when you think about using the squid ink bun, right, that was really brilliant. So I think the students would be really happy to hear about now how you were able to the past couple of years be at Coachella, which is a real honor in the culinary world now. A lot of iconic chefs are part of that. So tell us about how that happened.
So we were invited to be the VIP dinner experience for Coachella last year. So they built us a 110-seat restaurant in the desert as part of their VIP area. And we show up, it's halfway put together, and we were opening that afternoon, and they're hanging the sunshades, they're hanging up our signs, and we're trying to train a combination of our, what we like to call like the Broad Street Navy SEALs, a small group of people that do all of these very high volume offsite events, and temp staff that Golden Voice and Coachella provided to us. So we're trying to train this new temp staff. We're trying to make sure that the restaurant's actually open by 5 p.m., which was when our first reservation was for. And it was a wild experience. This was the first Coachella since the shutdown. Mm-hmm. And this was the first time I had ever been to Coachella. And this is the first time Broad Street has obviously ever been at Coachella. And before we knew it, we had 110 people packed inside this little
Wow.
restaurant built at this incredible festival. And we just kind of went with it turn by turn. And before we knew it, we set 3 records for Golden Voice. It was best single day sales, best weekend sales, and best combined weekend sales.
Wow.
And it was just because of how we kind of adapted to the high volume, which we were used to in Malibu.
Right.
But in this festival setting.
What did you serve there?
We served a prefix menu, and then we also allowed them to purchase some of the items a la carte. But it was just some of the staples: oysters on the half shell, shrimp cocktail, lobster roll, caviar. Items that you wouldn't necessarily think would go in the middle of Coachella or in the desert in Indio, but it worked because that's actually what people were craving. It's exactly what they wanted. They wanted oysters on the half shell. They wanted caviar. They wanted urchin. All of those things that were pretty decadent, it worked very well inside of a VIP area of this festival. And we did it again this year. And we were invited back this year, but in a different format. So we had a smaller build out in VIP and then an additional build out in general admission. So we did so well last year, they invited us to do 2 setups this year. And then that same promoter and organizer has asked us to do, I think, like 3 or 4 additional festivals for them this year. One of which I think is coming up in a couple of weeks. So
that's fantastic, right? I mean, that's pretty amazing. So when it comes to, we spoke the other day about branding, right? When we think about a concept and a business, how important is branding for your business now?
I think that today's consumer wants a brand that they can get behind. And what does that mean, get behind? It's like they want a brand that they're a fan of and that they feel like they're in on something that other people aren't in on. So one of the things that we had done, when I had first started the company, it was a small banner. It was a hand-drawn oyster shell that my friend drew for $100. The name of the business and my business phone number, which is really just a Google Voice account on my regular phone. And it worked. And it was, New England inspired. And I had just moved to Los Angeles, and it was the first few months of living in California. But as I had, became acclimated to California and learned more about the culture and spent more time here, that was then shown in the brand. I had moved here from upstate New York, highly influenced by New England, living out here. I then realized, like, hey, we are a California brand. We need to kind of evolve into what that may be. So now I think the best way to describe it is, late 80s, early 90s, Southern California, surf culture, Hollywood, like that's what it is. And that's just because those are the things that I like and things that I look to have fun and express myself through Broad Street Oyster Company. Like, you come into one of our restaurants, there's a VHS player playing movies that I watched as a kid because I think it's funny. Like, that's just what I want to see. There's the same posters, the same style of posters, some of which I had on my wall growing up, and I just hang them in the restaurant. So just to get back to how important the brand is, you need to have an identity. You need to be able to be something that the consumer wants to show up and enjoy being around. And I think the easiest way to do that is by expressing yourself and to be true to yourself and be authentic to what you want to represent. If there's a poster that I don't want, it's not going up on the restaurant. If there's a movie that I hated, it's not going in that player. And that same attitude is reflected in the decor as it is on the menu. If there's a menu item that I don't want, it's not there because I didn't put it on there. And that's what you need to do. And then you need to be able to reward those guests by giving them items that they can remember you by, or that they can slap on the back of their phone so that when someone else recognizes that, they say, oh, you go there? I love their lobster roll. Which location? Malibu, Grand Central? And just a funny story, we had just been sent a screenshot from someone's, I don't know which dating profile it was, but it said, hikes in Malibu on Sunday, followed by Broad Street Oyster Company lobster rolls. And I thought that I'm like, yeah, there we go. And that just shows that we have a brand and we have something that people
Mm.
want to be a part of. And it's crucial. And you have to be able to translate that from that feeling that you have about it to the physical space. And then that physical space has to then be represented in the digital world,
Yeah.
whether that's Instagram, TikTok, whatever you want to put it on. And it's hard to tie it all together. But as I said a couple of minutes ago, like I think the easiest way to do that is just by being true to yourself and putting out the things that you enjoy.
I know exactly what you're talking about because in Malibu, he has the poster of Pamela Anderson. That's
There's also an older Ferrari on that poster.
That's amazing. And social media, do you do that yourself, or how do you handle the?
So when we had first started, I did not even have an Instagram account. One of my childhood friends was visiting me from New York, and he goes, "Well, let me see your Instagram." I don't have that. He goes, "You don't even have one person?" I go, "No." He goes, "You have to make one." So he just logs in. I think he linked it to like his Facebook. I don't know how it works. He like linked it to his Facebook account. It's like Broad Street Oyster Company. And then he followed it. It was 1 follower. And then a few weeks later, there's 100 followers. And then 1,000. I'll never forget that. That was May of 2019. I think we had 1,000 followers. And then it was 10,000, then 100,000, and then 100 and whatever it is now, 45,000. And that was huge.
Amazing. I think you'll have a few more followers now.
Yeah, that's
right. That's amazing. So now I think we should open it up to our wonderful students and staff and get some questions. Does anybody have some questions out there for Christopher?
I have a mic for anyone who does.
Yes. Okay, over here we have.
Where do your is it on?
Yeah.
Where do you source your caviar?
So Thomas Keller had started a caviar company a few years ago with the former CEO of Sterling Caviar. And we were actually one of their first accounts in Southern California.
Wow.
They had found us through Instagram. It's called Regis Ova. And they sent down their first ever sales rep and employee to this little commissary kitchen that I had just moved into from my apartment. And they came down and said, "Would you like to do a caviar tasting?" I go, "That'd be great." And I've worked with them ever since. So we work with Regis Ova, and it is a California sturgeon based out of Northern California that they get everything from.
That's amazing. Has Mr. Keller been to your restaurants?
He has not, but they did treat me to an amazing birthday dinner at Per Se a couple of years ago, and that was, for me, like an amazing experience. So everyone in the kitchen signed the menu, and it was pretty special. So,
Oh, that's amazing.
but Thomas Keller was not there.
Come on, don't be shy. You entrepreneurs out there have questions, I'm sure.
Is there a particular time or moment that you can remember when you knew what you're doing now was what you wanted to do for certain? Like just hit you at some random point of the day and you're like, you know what, this is what I'm going to do regardless of anything. Like you said, you didn't really know at the start what you were doing, but do you remember any like exact moment when you knew this is what I'm going to do regardless?
It was the day I launched the website, because that was me putting my face and name to the world, attaching it to this company. At the time, it wasn't a company, it was just an idea. But I knew that when I hit publish for that website, that there was no turning back. And not to tie everything to my birthday, but that was also on a birthday a couple of years prior. I waited until that day to actually publish it. I think I had just turned 29. And I hit publish, and I said, okay, I am now the owner of Broad Street Oyster Company. What am I going to do next? And that was the moment. But I'll never forget it. I'll never forget that feeling of making that website go live and knowing this is it. This is my identity now. This is me as an entrepreneur.
Thank you.
Wow. Any other questions out there? We got over there. Perfect.
Hi. So when you said you opened up the coffee and ice cream company, do you still have that? And
We do.
Have you thought about expanding that into other locations?
I didn't mean to interrupt you, but yes, we do. We still have it. It's Broad Street Coffee Co. It is just a couple of doors away from Broad Street Oyster Company in Malibu. We have soft serve ice cream. We have gelato. Actually, Nancy Silverton's, Nancy's Fancy
Oh,
gelato.
nice.
We were the first retail shop to serve it by the scoop. And we have thought of what that may look like as what we like to call like the second ride at the amusement park, right? So if you're showing up to a Broad Street Oyster Company for lunch, you're either getting there early to get in line, so you're going to need a coffee, or you're going to need an ice cream after having a lobster roll.
Yeah.
And we would love to bring that to scale. But if I'm being completely honest and transparent, like we have to get a full grip on the oyster side before we then want to scale the coffee side. But we are toying around with the idea of opening up the second one on the Huntington Beach Pier. So
That would be amazing.
that's, I
Yeah.
think it's,
Yeah.
I think that's the one to do it in. So.
Yeah.
So why do you recommend school as the first alternative to overcoming some of the things and challenges that you would have had prior to not going to school?
I am the first to admit that I am envious of students that were continuing their education after middle school, high school, whatever you want to call it, whether that's a community college, whether that's a four-year university, an Ivy League, a culinary institute, because it builds a foundation of knowledge and it builds a network for you. Like some of your peers, years from now, hopefully, you can call them up with a question, or you can call them up with a job offer, or you can call them up asking for a lead on a location. And it's just building this network that you may not think you will ever tap into, but it's there. And that's something that I wish I had. Because when I moved to California, I knew nobody, not a soul. And it was an uphill battle to even figure out, which bakery do I go to? At LAX, where do you pick up oysters from? I don't know. I have to figure that out. So that's something that I wish that I had had, and it's something I still toy around with. Like if you ask my girlfriend, she thinks I'm crazy because I'm like, I think I'm gonna go back to school. She's like, when? And
I'll be your missions advisor.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. You have a network here with us always, right, everyone?
But it's giving you the framework that I think is so necessary to have a leg up, because I haven't described more than 1% of the issues that I've encountered over the last 5.5 years. And there have been so many times where I've come across something that I did not know what it meant. What does an LOI mean? What's triple net mean? Those are just some of the real estate terms that I had to figure out when I was looking at the first lease. And if you are able to have that confidence when you're doing your first walkthrough of a space and not thinking of these list of terms you have to look up when you get home, it just makes you feel more confident. And it makes you feel like you're ready to take that step. And I think that graduating or even just attending a few courses at any type of university or schooling helps build that knowledge and builds that confidence that you need as an entrepreneur, because so much of this is, honestly staked on how I'm feeling, right? It's like, well, I don't know if I'm going to do this. It's like, all right, well, then everything's done. Like Broad Street Oyster Company's over. So I think that, just to reiterate, the more you know, the easier things will be.
The restaurant in San Francisco, is it going to be the same name, or is it going to
Same name.
Same name. Okay, great.
Do you consider expanding on the East Coast?
I do, but I'm hesitant for two reasons. The first reason is that I do not like the weather, which is why I moved. And the second reason is that I want to build this network of restaurants, the same logistics. You have to build this, build out this chain so that the logistics of everything work. So we want to go up and down the coast. That's the first step in my mind. And then we want to shift inland, and then we want to go maybe to the southwest, build this group of, let's say, 7 to 10 restaurants, and then maybe we create another hub. Maybe Miami. I like Miami, so maybe we'll start there and then go from there.
Based on the weather, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I joke about that, but there's a couple of things you really have to think about with the weather, especially for my concept. My concept is so dependent upon outdoor dining and people wanting the beach time, summertime, summertime beach town splurge.
Yeah.
If it's 30 degrees and snowing, you may not be in the mood for oysters on the half shell, or I look at the weather almost as much as I look at our numbers every day, because I can forecast what we will do to a pretty accurate degree just based on the previous few years. And I look at, if it's 80 degrees, that's a good money day. I know that.
Yeah.
If it's 90 degrees, it's an even better day. If it's 100 degrees, it's actually worse than a 90-degree day because people want to stay inside and be in the air conditioning. Or if it's raining, I'm basically crying because it's the worst day for me. And I hate this. Previous quarter was terrible.
I was going to say, it's been so much rain.
They're like, it's so great. Now the water reservoirs, I'm like, I don't care.
I have a question.
You kind of already answered my question, but how did you decide on California before the 6-week, travel from to California?
So I had visited a couple of friends in California that were out here on like a vacation after high school. So this is now 15 years ago, and they were living in Orange County. And I wanted to go see them for a week or two, and they were living in Huntington Beach. And fast forward to now, it's actually funny because the first place that we went was Ruby's on the pier. And then we walked over to Duke's and snuck in to get a drink. And then stayed with them for a couple of weeks, went back to New York, began my young adult life, of living in Colorado and the Northeast and around all of that. But I had always known, it's weird, but it's like I knew, even before that moment I visited my friends for just that week or two, that I wanted to live in California. I think growing up in upstate New York, it's on the opposite side of the country. It's beautiful. The weather's nice. Like that was the grass is always greener on the other side idea, right? It's like, well, it's probably better than here. And I can honestly say Malibu is better than Poughkeepsie, New York. But that was the main driving force. And one of the things that my dad said when I had packed up and drove across the country, he goes, well, if you're going to be broke, you might as well do it out there than here. And that's the mentality that I had when I came on out to California. I was like, all right, well, I'm happy. Like it's 80 degrees, it's sunny, it's beautiful. I can be near the beach. I can go to the mountain, whatever I wanted to do. And that was the main factor. It just so happened that there were other factors that I didn't realize were working to my advantage at that time, right? So New England seafood, I wouldn't say it's a novelty, but it's not as common as in upstate New York or New England itself, right? So that worked to my advantage. And I think that it may not have been something that I was truly conscious of until, a few months into trying to start the business, or a couple of years in of like really recognizing that what we were doing wasn't commonplace. So that was the main reason.
Amazing. That's a great story. All right. Any last questions? One more?
Do you think your couple years of traveling around Europe motivated, influenced, or changed your initial vision in any way if you had it at that time?
I think I may have said this earlier in the talk, but I always think that it's so much easier to reframe the narrative to a more romanticized version after the fact, right? I had bounced around. When I first started my travels, I flew into Norway, from Norway into Southeast Asia to Australia and South America. And I like to look back on some of those moments and think, was that an influence? And I don't really know. I think so, right? Like I know that traveling around the world, meeting different people and trying different cuisines definitely impacted my own personal life. So I would have to be kidding myself if I didn't think that it impacted the business or influenced the business. Like I don't even like telling the story that much because it sounds too phony, right? But it's like I was on a boat, a sailboat from Panama to Colombia, and we stopped on these islands. We were out on this boat for a few days, and we were actually trading rum with some of the indigenous that would paddle up to our sailboat. and they would give us buckets of spiny lobster. And there's days that we would literally just rip apart lobster all day long. And it's like, it's easy for me to look back at that now. I'm like, that was the influence. But it was, it wasn't though, right? It's like, that was
Yeah.
just me having an incredible trip with 15 other strangers that I had
Yeah.
bought a ticket on. Right? Like I bought a ticket on this boat. And I had no idea that something like that would happen. And I don't think that you really know what your influences are until you're already past it, right? It's like you can look back and be like, wow, that was an amazing day. And it was an amazing trip. It was amazing, 18 or 20 months of traveling around the world and meeting the people. To wine bar, to birthday parties, doing those early pop-ups. I hope that answered the question. Yeah.
Excellent. Christopher, thank you so much. Your knowledge and your story is just an inspiration to myself, and I'm sure everyone out here. What a wonderful career. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And just one last thing I want to say to every one of you. I have a business card over there. I have tote bags. You can DM us on Instagram. You can find my email on the business card. But if there's ever a moment in any one of your entrepreneur journeys that you feel like you need that extra push, or you have a question, or you need advice, or this, that, or the other, or you just had a really crappy day and you wanted to just bounce something off of me, please do it. Because I wish, like I said earlier, it's like I wish that I had that network. And I was fortunate enough that the small group of friends that I have were able to keep me going. And it's hard. There's really difficult days, but then the highs are amazing. Like you'll never be able to touch it. And I just want to make sure that anyone who even is flirting with the idea of starting a business or becoming an entrepreneur for themselves, right? If you feel it, just do it. Because I promise you, once it hits, you'll never regret it.
Thank you so much. Once
Thank you.
again, give a warm round of applause. We hope you will come back again and
Definitely.
see us. Excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Maybe next year I'll come back and be like, you know what? Everything I said I was wrong. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Of course.
Yes, yes, yes.